Thank you so much, and thanks to the organizers for this conference so rich. And I will begin where we stopped yesterday in the evening with Sarbiewski. Sarbiewski, known as the Sarmatian Horace and the Christian Horace in England, earned his reputation with pieces that deeply impacted English poetry in the 17th century. The Neo-Latin Horatian imitations of Sarbiewski proved to be more influential than their classical originals. Well, just a first painting from about Piotr Skargas, the teacher, the master of Sarbiewski. So, Ode of Kazimierz, a volume of 35 poems were published in 1646 by a certain Hills. My contribution aims to consider the influence of Sarbiewski's famous treatise De acuto et arguto, De acutus et argutus, included in the edition of his Praecepta Poetica, the first version of which was read in 1619-1620. In August 1623, he read this treatise publicly in Rome. He claimed to compare his thoughts with those of scholars from Italy, France, and Germany, most of whom were Jesuits. He also stated that he wanted to put an end to the distortions of his work. As a result, could the Spanish Jesuit from Aragon, Baltasar Gracián, author of the Agudeza y arte de ingenio, 1648, also revised by his author in 2 times, have been directly influenced by Sarbiewski. Until now, agudeza has been the subject of comparisons focused exclusively on Italy. So what does the encounter with Sarbiewski bring us today? These texts are part of European North-South networks that invite to examine a different approach to conceptism in Jesuit culture, but also in diplomatic and political culture. After a synthetic comparison between Gracián and Sarbiewski's ideas of the argutia and acumen, it will be essential to reconstruct geographical dissemination of Sarbiewski's treatise among the Spanish elites of the 17th century. It will be essential. The political and cultural intermediaries involved in this circulation, whose origins on the periphery of Europe are often neglected. Finally, the readers of those specific productions on the Concordia discourse were strongly fascinated by the expressions of dissent. Far from an exclusively rhetorical reading, the intellectual and spiritual virtue of Baroque acuity allows us to question the emergence and success of an aesthetic of astonishment that seduced a fragmented world in the first half of the 17th century, which recognized Martial as an undisputed master and Horace as the guide to a disenchanted peace and harmony. Is this success indicative of an appreciation for complex, indirect, and ambiguous symbolic forms, or does it reflect an effort to unify these elements within other intellectual or scientific systems? The final part of my presentation will concern the notion of dissent as defined by Sarbiewski and his readers as well as his admirers. in the first step, let us to return for a moment to the presence of Sarbiewski poetry in England, as mentioned in the introduction. It's a good point of departure for a comparative study. The conditions for its dissemination are linked to the enduring presence of Neo-Latin poetry in England, which is very important, which was less widespread in 17th century Spain. The circumstances of his reception in England are signified by his first collection of verse, published only in 1625 in Köln. Augmented by other work, it was eventually published as Lyricorum Libri IV, Epodon Liber Unus Alterque Epigrammatum in Antwerp, 1632-1634, Rome, 1643, and Milan, 1645. Horace contributed to the popularity of Sarbiewski, but Sarbiewski developed a disenchanted Horatianism, deprived of carpe diem, and fostering a contempt for the world and detachment from all things contemplated with indifference. He introduced the question of choice, which reflected a Jesuit interpretation of the power of will. Nearly a dozen further editions to the end of the century attest to his continuing popularity, including one in Poland in 1681 and another one in Cambridge in 1684. He became widely known as Casimir. His fortune in England appeared in a context of growing interest in spiritual literature, inspired by the spirit of Counter-Reformation, which had begun to penetrate England with Fray Luis de Granada, Robert Southwell, republished 7 more times. Sarbiewski was read before George Hill's selection by the Latin-educated elite. According to Czesław Miłosz, the originality of Casimir consists in Neoplatonic or Hermetic interpretation of the classical landscape of retirement, and in the introduction or new themes, solitude, earthly paradise, and nature as a divine hieroglyph, end of quote. Moreover, praise of peace between Christian nations is combined in Sarbiewski lyrics with the praise of retreat, as it is demonstrated by certain iconographic details of the English frontispiece in the 1646 edition. De perfecta poesia, praecepta poetica, it's a manual on poetics, probably written based on lectures given between 1626 and 1627 at the College of Pollock. The main argument of the text is presented at the beginning in the part of this praecepta poetica, the acuto et arguto. The statement, the argument is very famous in Sarbiewski. The point is a statement in which the inconsistent meets the consistent, so that it is a form of a verbal expression with concordant discord or discordant concord. Acutum est oratio continens affinitatem dissentanei et consentanei. As it is explained, the point is created by joining 2 opposite lines. The base of the triangle is the subject matter of the point, materia acuti. The 2 opposing rising sides are the inconsistency, dissentaneum, and the consistency, consentaneum, which meet at the apex of the triangle. The author calls this meeting a union, unio, which is precisely the point, concordia discourse. It's a cosmic principle, and where to introduce the difference with Gracián, I would say that when Sarbiewski would speak probably about God, according to Polish criticism, is very important in that reading, Gracián is concerned by the mind, el entendimiento, and above all, a mind in action. So we can have an example in this quote by Gracián. Gracián, in this text published in 1648, after a first version in 1642, would formulate his theory of the concept less than 20 years later, as follows, in Esencia de la agudeza ilustrada. You have the Spanish quotation and some words very significative of the similarity with Sarbiewski: proporción, consonancia, conexión de términos, combinación, los extremos, el correlato, la correlación, no? With this statement, also very famous in Gracián, de suerte que se puede definir el concepto, conceit. Es un acto del entendimiento que exprime la correspondencia que se halla entre los objetos, between objects, like in the previous definition statement by Sarbiewski. He emphasized the notion of beauty, adornment, artifice and appearance, correlation and harmony take precedence over contradiction, perhaps with some difference with Sarbiewski. Spanish examples are notable in Gracián to analyze the means of creative dissonance, ingeniosa disonancia. The harmony is predominant. Regarding, coming back to Sarbiewski, regarding the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the works on poetics and rhetoric, French and German Jesuits, Jacob Massen, for example, are massively considered as valuable references. On the contrary, very few elements are provided regarding a Spanish influence, namely Gracián, even after Sarbiewski and until the 18th century. This observation is more certainly linked to the growing of an anti-Jesuit, anti-Spanish Polish literature recently studied by Robert Marix in the Journal of Jesuit Studies. In this context, Sarbiewski is considered the founder of a Baroque style in a favorable Lithuanian Jesuit environment. References to local Jesuit authors are also important in Sarbiewski's work. They play a significant role in defining harmony. According to Polish historiography and Lithuanian also, Sarbiewski's influence on Gracián is beyond doubts, but not demonstrated. In particular, the notion of distance between opposites and the separation of terms whose harmony is the source of ingenious insight. The essence of distance is also defined by other terms characteristic of harmony, like we saw. Unlike Gracián, Sarbiewski was an exclusively Latin poet. Sarbiewski remains far from being considered in studies on Gracián's agudeza. It's now time to reconstruct, in the second part, the geographical dissemination of Sarbiewski treatise among the Spanish elites of the 17th century, the political and cultural intermediaries involved in this circulation, whose manifestation on the periphery of Europe are often neglected. The question is the concordia discourse of a phenomenon of erudition or the expression of a court culture? Does it correspond perhaps to a specific way of understanding it in Spain? Sarbiewski editions appeared throughout the 17th century, as I said, with edition in Milan, another also in Paris or Dijon in 1647. However, it is difficult to locate the presence of de acuto et arguto in Spanish libraries. Nevertheless, the question of his Spanish readers remains, which I will now address by attempting to reconstruct some elements of this dissemination. On the one hand, there are the libraries of the Jesuit colleges, the colleges of the Crown of Aragon, where Gracián worked from the 1620s to the 1630s. What was the diffusion of Jesuit books on ingenuity in Spain? The scholarship is missing with this topic. Martial and Horace were prominent, especially in Aragon, from where Martial was native, Bilbilis. But other theories of the epigram and the conceit are also present in the Spanish circulation. Michael Radau, mentioned here, for example, whose works belonging to the collection of the Duque de Uceda are preserved today at the National Library in Madrid. Michael Radau, German Jesuit, a professor of rhetoric in the Braniewo Collegium around 1641, gave wide diffusion to Sarbiewski. The text is mentioned here. It had 24 editions in Amsterdam and other major European cities. For another part, Jacob Massen, who contributed to Sarbiewski fortune, was also prized by the same Duque de Uceda, Juan Francisco Pacheco Telies Giron, former Viceroy of Sicily, ambassador in Rome, who died in Vienna. He was a book collector of German books written in Latin, and especially about concord between Catholicism and Protestantism. Editions of Jacob Massen, Jaime Massen, Hispanized, were also present in the library of the Duque that was transferred to the convent of La Trinidad, which were trained Trinitarian monks who then left on missions of Catholic reconquest. In conclusion, did Gracián know about Sarbiewski via Massen? Perhaps. Lorenzo Ramírez del Prado, who was present in the catalogue yesterday of the auctions, a humanist and famous book collector, owner of a library of 8,000 books, also a politician close to the Count Duke of Olivares, wrote a commentary on Martial's Hypomnemata, published in Paris in 1607, in response to Matthaus Rader, a German Jesuit in Sarbiewski circle. The importance here is also the transmission of private libraries. Spanish ambassadors and diplomats in Poland, as the Marquis of Aitona, ambassador in Vienna in 1624, can be mentioned here. Francisco de Moncada, Marquis of Aitona, was sent in 1629 in the court of Brussels, where he became a close friend of Rubens. Flanders were a special convergence and meeting place. We mentioned yesterday Rubens in the frontispiece of the edition of 32. Since the 1570s, the court of Brussels became a strategic information hub connecting with Stockholm, Copenhagen, and the Baltic region. Based on these figures mentioned, a court culture is behind a court aesthetic inspired by the many possibilities of the Baroque ingenuity, which extends the power of wonder into the art of verbal sophistication. This kind of wonder is a pure product of the intellect, an object of mental curiosity that reproduces itself infinitely, as shown by the mechanics of acuteza produced by ingenium, as in Tesauro, for example. This logic becomes a method of resolving cases of contradiction, concordia, discourse. So the reasons for the interest of these subtle forms is reinvested in negotiation and the art of peace at work in courtly and diplomatic activity. I will conclude with my third moment. Beyond the words of ingenuity, acuteza, acumen, what does it signify? It seems that the political content and also the development in Rome is a key. The move to Rome is essential to understand the implication with peace and the new moment for peace around Urban VIII in defense of peace during the stay of Sarbiewski in Rome. A reflection on acuity as a rhetoric tool for establishing peace would be accurate here. Did Sarbiewski win the support of the Jesuits by offering a verbal tool for peace negotiations? Antonio Posevino, diplomat of the Jesuit order, sent to Poland and Muscovy at the end of the 16th century to mediate peace between Stephen Batory, King of Poland, and Ivan the Terrible, was close to Sarbiewski. Discord as dissent and also peace thinking are linked. I would like to conclude on Rome and Rubens' Rome with the clear decline of Spanish Rome as it has been studied with Urban VIII, so as a support of peace and very linked also to Rubens. So we can understand all the connections around Sarbiewski. Thank you very much.